will say that it's now officially 1:06 and I'll call the meeting to order and recognize that all members are currently present. Which is great. And it's nice to be back in this room, as you mentioned.
So nice to be back.
Yes. So. I know, and it was just a week ago that we met, so here we are again.
Yeah.
All right, well, first order of business, we need to select a clerk. And when we talked about this last time, I suggested we just have a rotation. And I'd suggest, let's do alphabetic by name. So maybe we'll start with Dawn, and then we can go to Lois, and then Brian, and then Wendy will be up again, so.
I think that's
Just do it that way.
wonderful comments. I love it.
Well, I'm looking right at Dawn.
Yes.
That looks good.
Plus I volunteered.
Of course you did. Yeah. All right, okay, with that. Then we have the minutes that I didn't send around until this morning. Everybody got a
Yes.
chance to read them?
Yeah.
Now we'd entertain any comments or corrections. Lois, did you get a chance to?
I know I didn't have a chance, but
Okay.
I will, and
I won't say that next time. Work out it. Yeah, no, we didn't have any comments.
I didn't hear any comments either.
All right, well, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that the minutes of August 26th, 3/25 be approved as circulated to the group.
Second, but.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
I
All right, that would be unanimous, and I'll send those into to the conference. Great. All right, so next on our agenda, was, we thought we would start today's discussion with, the memo that FinCom sent, drafted and sent to the select board meeting. In theory, last April, but the full select board, for disclosure, did not get the memo. It was not distributed, so we can sort of start there. I'll also just comment that since, if you want to close that, that's fine. The other window's open, so, yeah. Yeah, audio. Yeah. So I was saying we should review the memo. It was attached. I couldn't put it in the minutes because it's a separate document. I don't know how to do that. I don't have the right license. But I assume, does everybody have a copy of that, or should we bring it up on the screen? Does that help for those who might be in the audience? Right.
If-
and was it, how was it provided to us? I don't.
That was the
So
other
it-
attachment to Wendy's email.
Yeah,
this morning
it was in
along
my email,
Good.
the minutes.
right?
And Don, I think previously, you should be ready previously.
Yeah.
And this is the memo that Don prepared to go to the select board last April.
Mhm.
That included some proposals that, for a variety of reasons, were never taken up by the select board,
Mhm.
but remain relevant.
While Ryan's bringing it up, I would say that this was an attempt to modify the existing language.
Yeah,
Having seen, you know, I frankly, I prefer the other policies we've been looking at. The other.
yeah, you know what, I kind of did too, but,
Okay,
but maybe we can talk about those
Yeah.
separately, and if there's some that we prefer, we can look at those too.
yeah, so that would just suggest a different way of
Yeah.
approaching this.
Yeah.
And it could be just a two-step process.
Mhm.
Right.
We can, since we've been asked to focus on reserve funds.
Mhm.
We can begin by thinking about how to do the existing policies to change the reserve fund approach, but another item on our agenda might be more of an overhaul, because that's gonna
Right.
involve a lot
Other
of
policies.
engagement by the finance department.
Mhm.
And that might be better time for a different time period than what.
Absolutely, I think when we wrote the charge and we talked last week, we have no intention of rewriting the financial
Exactly.
policies document.
Yeah.
But rather,
Yeah.
there's some select policies that we wanted to call out, and if we can refine them in a way that we can
Right,
find
exactly.
agreement to, they can get
Yeah.
incorporated.
Yeah.
Exactly.
As Ryan
Yeah,
sees fit.
that's-
In the future.
Yeah.
Even though we all, now that we've had a chance to look at some example policies of other towns, are all identifying just, for me, it was kind of the way they approached some, wasn't necessarily substance in each case,
Right.
that I thought was more manageable and more comprehensive, but we don't need to go there now. That could be a project when we're done with our first objects.
Yeah, and it's hard because these are all interrelated too, right?
Exactly.
So, you know, we're gonna talk about stabilization funds, and now you have to ask about debt, right? Well, you know,
Yeah.
how much stabilization you put in if you're gonna anticipate that, so.
Yeah, exactly.
We know that we'll be talking about this in a while.
Mhm.
So when I went through this, it looked like, and Don, I don't know, you're probably most familiar with this, but you sort of recapped some of the, reference information from DLS and the Financial Management Board as a precursor, which was great. So all those links are in there, which is helpful. And then you jump into sort of ideas around the free cash and stabilization funds. And I also, it occurred to me when this started to come up, we were in town meeting, prepping for town meeting, talking about new stabilization funds being added or funding of the stabilization funds. And so one of the things we need to sort of think about is, are these the only stabilization funds that we're talking about? Do we need to agree sort of upfront? Are there certain funds that we want to be talking about? Well, think about reserves, right? Because
That's a good point.
you know, there was a discussion of creating a debt stabilization fund and a capital stabilization fund in addition to funding a general stabilization fund.
Yeah.
That's
so-
good. So this was drafted in the context of the warrant.
Not at all, actually.
No, it wasn't,
It
yeah.
wasn't. Those
It
were,
wasn't, yeah,
so I think the policy should be generic
yeah,
and allow for the creation of umpteen stabilization funds as the select board feels is warranted. But the policy should simply provide the framework. And then when there is a need for, you know, a new stabilization fund, the policy calls for it and we just implement, right? I think the, that then raises the question of percentages, right?
right. And you know, having a broad, you know,
Yes.
an umbrella kind of limit might actually be helpful, which is we've seen
Yeah.
in some of the policies also, not just each individual one, but in totality, how much reserves you know, put aside. And then the other striking thing is the best practice is review these every single year.
That's right.
Because,
That's right.
we also have to be mindful of our community, which is unique and different from other communities and, you know, as we sit here right now, we know there's some very large capital projects potentially coming down the pike, and that ought to be a consideration, but maybe sort of on the end side, right?
I would say those would perhaps trigger the creation of a new. capital
Yeah,
stabilization
yeah,
fund,
yeah.
But the policy should be the policy, right? Yeah.
Right.
Well, and if the policy states some umbrella target
Yeah.
percentages that are in line with recommendations, best practices recommendations, and what we see in other towns, nothing stops us when that a large capital project is a reality from revisiting that.
Right,
And, but at least it means that
Yeah.
we're thinking about it.
right.
If we're
Yeah.
talking about setting up a capital, a debt stabilization fund that pushes us to a much higher percentage, then, you know,
Yeah.
we're sort of, we're asking the question, we're putting the question on the table just by having you know, reasonable percentages, right, set in the policy now.
Would it be useful if I walked through the, what I think are the key elements of
Sure.
the policy?
Yeah, sure.
So I would say going to, starting on page 3, is
Okay.
everything before the PM was
Yeah.
part of the memo. The policy, adjusts, paragraph A or item, section A
Yeah.
of 7, the free cash section, to add, you know, subpoints A through E, which are about the implementation or how you manage free cash. It says that, you know, the goal is to have 5 to 7% of the general fund budget in free cash. And that it is to only be dipped into or to be utilized when it can be replenished.
Mhm.
And that's because it's really working capital of the town. We want to
Yeah.
maintain it for that purpose.
A lot of policies speak to that
Yeah,
expectation, which makes a lot of sense.
yeah. It comes straight from guidelines from the state, which is
Yeah, of
nice.
course.
And that, unless the stabilization funds, which is to say, you know, not free cash, but the stabilization funds have been fully funded, then free cash is only for use for one-time expenditures or for an actual capital purchase in lieu of a stabilization fund, withdrawal, so to speak. If,
Which, I sort of harken that, so I was working assumption of what we used to do. and I don't
Yes.
know if our current policies say that, but it used to be that if we accumulated up to $10 million, when we exceeded that in free cash, then we were always talking about how could those funds then be allocated to whether it's capital or paying for buses or whatever, they're
Yeah.
one-time purposes.
Yeah.
Um,
so that's one way to do it. I
Yeah.
think using a percentage is more enduring, because 10 million, I think that was in
That was a long
place
time
when
ago.
our budget was half of what it is
Right,
today.
right.
Yeah.
Probably.
And then, so paragraph, subparagraph C says when free cash is over 7%. Then the money flows, sort of spills over into the general stabilization fund. Or or special purpose stabilization fund until those have reached their targets. And there may be, so I'll speak more to those when we get down to them. And then when all of those have hit their target, then you can use the money to reduce the tax. If it falls below 5%, in the course of a year, this is line F,
Mhm.
then it falls on the town manager and finance director to figure out how to get back to that 5% minimum level as a kind of safe operating balance in the checking account. And now,
This is what's interesting here, when I saw that, it really has to happen before the operating budget, so you get free cash certified. You're going into a budget cycle before we start talking about operating budgets, this has to be a fact that would be present, that everyone should do.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So before you go further, one of the questions I have on this is, we always, and I had some back and forth with Anthony on this sort of, what constitutes the general fund?
Yeah.
Right, so
Great
you
question.
have your operating budget, you got OPEB, you have pension, you have your debt within the levy, outside the levy, you have your reserve, it's really, to me, like everything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Our policy today for that, it's like funding of capital. Whether you allow whatever to replenish our capital, always made a calculation exclusive of excluded debt.
yeah.
And so that's a conversation that I wanted to ask here too, when we talk about general fund budget, is that inclusive or exclusive? Because other towns use their revenues as a base.
Yes.
Sometimes at looking at this, right, and that
Right.
might be, I don't know if that's good or bad, but,
No, I think you're right. I
in
think,
theory, they should be balanced. If you've got a balance sheet going into your budget, it should be, but,
yeah. And it's a question that comes up again when we look at the capital, the appropriate tier 1 and tier 2 capital, what percentage of the general fund they should be. And I think it's a great policy level kind of discussion.
yeah.
And on that, it makes sense if the stabilization, if the free cash level is there as a buffer for other things, then for sort of the inflow and outflow of revenues throughout the year. Those things like bond payments that we know are very highly predictable, we don't need to buffer those, right? We kind of have a fund. We'll come back to
Is
this, but so that excluded debt. not getting
Is that the
affected.
general definition of what the general fund is?
Yeah, I mean-
Is that standard? I just wanted,
I've heard different things, so I mean, I think it's the question of what you then include or exclude, which there could be some nuances, but big picture, I mean, you're. There's the smaller elements that you can add or remove or what have you, but for the most part, it's. What it takes to run the town on an annual basis.
Right.
So
So there's also another,
typically, yeah, because that is an obligation.
just.
Well, yeah, so I personally, I would take the excluded debt service out of that,
that's what our current policy.
Yeah, that's what I would how I would handle it, but if it's anything within the levy is kind of that's really where the core of. When I think about that.
So is that something that, we would need to be clearly defined in the policy that we're writing, is
Mhm.
what we mean by general fund?
Well, it may also come back, so, we talk about audited financials and Moody's. The general fund is the audited financials for the non-enterprise funds, but there's actually other funds in there. If you look at the audited financials, they're broken down to a couple different funds, but that general fund is really what Ryan alluded to, it's sort of the,
And that's what we will mean when we talk about 5 to 7%. I just,
Yeah.
that is gonna be
Yeah.
in line with
That's-
practice, with good practice generally for
Right.
towns in
Yeah.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Okay, I just, then,
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because if, yes, the excluded debt is an obligation for us, but it's also, over and above what we would otherwise be raising, because it's excluded debt service, so, I think of it just, again, the elements within the levy that we have to then account for.
keep in mind that some of those smaller percentages are what we should fund every year just to maintain our assets,
yeah,
right? Like you would otherwise do the depreciation, right? It's really what is trying to replace your existing assets, not buying.
You're referring to,
So we have a policy that says we would spend between what, 3 and, hold on, we might have to look at them, but
Yeah.
there's one that's capital replenishment. But it's within the line. So we would, the
Right.
capital budget
yes,
is set between, I don't know if it's 5 to 7, there's 2 distinctions.
Right.
There's like a
I know.
3% and under, and then up to 5%. I can't remember
Right.
which.
And I think the big question, when we get to that, is whether we count the school budget in the town's capital.
CPS.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
CPS, yes. I mean, it wasn't originally, so whatever we thought, town, CPS is inclusive,
Yeah,
right? And
Right.
then CCHS is different because it's a legal entity.
right, that'll be a big topic when we get to debt. And
Yeah.
Not only debt, but capital. I mean,
Yeah.
Not debt.
Yeah,
capital.
Yeah, and how is it that we sent CCHS?
Very much.
Capital budgets, yeah.
And that's a good point, because it probably would be helpful, especially with the regional, how you would. Because it's still an expense within the levy, but if you were to choose to remove it or what have you, defining some of those aspects, because these are based on percentages. But it's also assuming that we are all in agreement what the offer,
replenish, yeah.
what the budget is, so.
Right.
And so there may be something to, or, to get the lowest point about being specific about what we're including.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right, so making note that we need to define. What we mean when we refer to a general fund budget.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, because in my mind, anytime I see something defined as a percentage, I want to know percentage of
Exactly,
what.
right,
Because
right.
if any confusion about that completely changes the impact.
And I think it's important that we do it in a way that the public could see it, like.
Yes,
Brian, for example, there used to be these, this year we have the Munis and it's an online Munis
Mhm.
implementation. There was a table in there at one point and it's been removed from the public view, but it was a picture of all the expenses. It had everything in it, so it had all the, the revenues and expenses, but it had all those other, the pension reserve, OPEB, and all of those pieces, and that it would be good that the public has access to that. And I can show that to you separately. I'm sure we can get to it,
Yeah,
but it's something I used, I was trying to get the same clarification from Anthony, and I used that table and said, is this how you define the 7% and this is the 3%? So when we get back to debt, I guess.
Yeah, well, and again, with
Yeah.
that, as an objective of this group, defining that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Because, in prior communities I worked in, it was a little easier because you didn't have a regional school, so you
Yeah.
knew that whatever that cost was, that you were supporting the school, needs to be capital, that, you were coming up with that, it wasn't
Yeah,
just cut us the check and.
Yeah.
See you next year, so.
I mean, how we do that allocation too is always the question. Like, how do we allocate CPS and the regions?
Right.
But the regions is always funded it separately.
So I think
Yeah,
we
but
have
let's-
a lot of discussion
we
on
do,
that when
right.
we get to capital
Right.
Projects.
So the other thing, I'll just comment,
Yeah.
in here, the 5 to 7%,
Yes,
I'm still a little uncomfortable with it because I think it's high. But we need to talk about
Okay.
this well, I don't know, it gets into general stabilization too. So why don't we keep going and
okay.
go back to that?
So, paragraph C,
Yeah.
where says that town policy, to create, to set aside funds for general stabilization and for specific purposes. So this section deals both with a general stabilization and special purpose stabilization funds. And says we would have that, again, 5 to 7%, which again may be higher.
Yeah.
For the general fund, the general stabilization fund, which is to say an undesignated stabilization fund with a higher threshold to withdraw. It requires, its general stabilization fund requires a higher vote at town meeting for withdrawals than special purpose stabilization funds do.
Does it?
Yeah, it did.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah,
They
no,
have
I
made
thought
a change
anything
to their own.
I think it's-
50% now.
Required 2/3.
That's what I.
No, the special purpose are half, 50%, just like free cash.
But it's,
It doesn't.
I think, to establish it, to establish it
Establish.
2/3,
Yeah.
to establish a special revenue fund is a 2/3 vote. And I think, maybe to put the money in, it's 2/3, but.
I'll take that as an action item
Yeah.
to.
Sure, it's enough.
Yeah,
To
that's,
double check.
yeah, that's a good question to
Yeah.
town councilor.
Well,
Oh.
Well, after Ryan,
Yeah,
Yeah, let's just, we know that, but we know that. The principle is to take money out of stabilization fund.
Good
To
with
go to
that.
town meeting, have a special town meeting.
Mhm. Yep.
But well, we also, to take money out of free cash.
You do,
You're all getting a vote, so it's.
Well, we have free cash. It's a
No.
question. Wait, another issue.
None of that.
So just to
That is that once you
Yeah.
establish
Yeah.
a funded. A general or specific purpose stabilization fund, you can always get to it by
Right.
jumping through the
Right.
hoop.
Yeah.
As opposed to
Yeah.
free cash where there are chunks of time.
it's an easy enough
So-
question.
Yeah.
just to recap, there are really three things here. There's the free cash.
Yeah.
There's a stabilization fund and there's an annual reserve fund, all of which are.
I think of that one as a fourth, right?
And
That's the one that's in the
purposes,
purview of the
because
finance committee, right? The reserve fund.
There's a small reserve. fund.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
come back to that.
Yeah,
and,
that's the-
So free cash can be accessed by a vote at town meeting. It has to be appropriated, right? So does a stabilization
Yeah.
fund. It has to be
Correct.
appropriated.
Yeah.
The annual reserve fund, however, is a part of the budget.
Right.
And that can, so it already appropriated. So when you speak, Wendy, at our last meeting, you said, but the problem with the stabilization fund is that you can't get to it any easier than free
I was
cash.
talking about stabilization funds, in
Yeah.
general, not the reserve fund. I think of that one special,
Okay,
because it's designed for use by
Within the course of
Yeah.
the fiscal year with
Right.
the approval.
mostly operations and mostly overages, but
And-
not
Yeah.
extreme emergencies
I'm
necessarily.
trying to remember a time when we ever, finance committee was ever actually approved release from that.
Legal services.
And when.
Legal services, I remember legal
Oh,
services
yes,
being
for
released
escrow,
once,
yes, yes,
Yeah.
okay, I just, yes, you're right, except for that.
yeah,
so
Okay.
So back to the general and special purpose stabilization in paragraph C. Line 2B, it says that the general stabilization fund, this is about the uses of it.
yeah.
It shall be limited to emergencies or major significant events. Disaster, uninsured loss, damage to a capital asset, or prolonged decrease in revenue of outsiders in control. And I think this prompted a lot of discussion among some members of the select board saying, well, that's not gonna happen. And it hasn't been a problem, we don't wanna tie up money for something that's never gonna happen. And so that was kind of one thing we have to think through. I would say if we
Yeah.
don't have a rainy day fund,
Mhm.
then we by default are saying that in the event of a disaster or a problem where we need access to money. We instead have to reduce our expenditures through layoffs. That would be our policy, that would be our default policy.
So I think the resistance is we have free cash and we could always access it.
So
So I
you
think the
can't
miss,
back there.
I know, okay, listen,
Yeah.
the miss is they didn't understand.
Yeah.
It's just, we have a ton of money, right? So, but I think the real case is in general stabilization, you can invest those funds differently. And they
Yes,
get a better
exactly.
return.
I-
We never talked about that. We should
Yeah.
have talked about it.
And
Because I
should-
think,
Well,
It's
I
definitely
brought it up at town
Right.
meeting, I will say. I did mention that.
yeah, no, but I mean, in the
Balance it out
discussions
and
by the
be-
select
Yeah.
board, I
Yeah.
don't think it was clear. And people's heads were still spinning about creating a debt stabilization fund, creating those other funds. So
Yeah.
their minds were really stuck on that stuff.
Well,
But I think it's worth, I
That's
mean, I
really
think
good
it's,
point. We have the example. We were able to stop putting money into the middle school. Debt stabilization fund because we earned enough interest.
Mhm.
So that we were able to forego the last transfer from free cash to fully funded, it fully
Yeah.
funded itself, it hit its target. It happened to be, well,
Yeah,
it happened to, there wasn't an original
Yeah.
target.
Mhm.
And it happened to be in a high interest time.
Yeah.
And it, or it was a time when investments were lucrative and it hit the cap that had been set.
Mhm.
But, and we could forego transferring another $1 million out of free cash into it to fully fund it. So there's real benefits to
I get it.
that.
Get it. Yeah, no, I think so. I think people also just, they were adding them up. 5 to 7%, yeah, 5, 7 for the general, and then it's sort of, that's like $15 million, you're just tying up on our, it used to be 10 million, but just trying to understand those uses.
Yeah,
and
I just think it
accessing
wasn't,
them. Um,
well, that's how we got here, but now we're not there.
well, it's the best
I would
practice,
argue
right?
that's really low compared to other towns.
Well, and you know, but the other thing is towns are all different too, so small towns need to typically have a higher percentage because they can't afford a fire truck. Right, and so, or somebody's, I mean, depending on how you use your general stabilization.
That's true.
And we do have an insurance reserve fund. It's not, and others don't necessarily have the same enterprise funds that we have, but, you know, there's a whole lot, that's why.
There
we're
are-
communities are very different.
The other correlation though,
Yeah,
isn't just the size of the town, and I don't believe there is a correlation with the size of the town, I didn't see it in the data.
well, no, but when you go to the seminars, that's the hot
That's
topic
what
at the end of it, which is,
Well,
why should it be that much? And the guys from DLS said, well, you know, if you're a small town, you need more reserves on a percentage
yeah,
basis.
yeah, I did that guy. To me, the correlation is the headroom to the top 2.5 limit. In our case, we're pretty darn close, and all the other towns that are close to the limit have big reserves. And,
Well, we should look at that, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
we had
and
that.
look at the AAA towns in particular. I'm
Well,
very focused.
That's all I looked at, that's all I looked at, like towns, and then they were in the slides that brought to the select board. Because, and so at one point in discussion with FinCom, I said, perhaps we should be adding that, that to the metric.
Yeah.
But, nobody else is doing that, so we back off of that, but if you look at that, room to the, when you can't just have a. If you can't access free cash because you're either 5 to 7% or it's in the 11 months of the year when you can't get to
Yeah.
that, which is, pretty. Secondly, then you can have a special town meeting,
Mhm.
but then it's only to raise the levy. That's the only option you have for raising additional revenue in an emergency. And if you're already near the levy limit, now you're calling for an override. So that's an argument for a general stabilization fund.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and,
But you
Well,
should
let's
use
look-
that general stabilization fund first.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
you just finished getting through that because or are you done?
No,
Okay.
but if you want to do, speak to Sue, I want to move on to C3 though, to special purpose, but if you.
Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying, continue on,
Okay, so special purpose stabilization funds, I think, are primarily should be forward-looking capital and tied to the capital plan. So if we have a capital plan coming out of this year that calls for four projects,
Mhm.
ideally, we would have 4 special purpose stabilization funds and be able to demonstrate to the community that we are building savings for them, because and this is a personal thing, I don't, but I have a preference for paying cash over debt. And that's,
Yeah, no, absolutely, especially how we fund the debt, how we fund the bond.
yeah, and we may well be entering, we've had a 40-year period of declining interest rates, and now we're in a new period of rising rates. We may be looking, be talking about 5 to 8% interest on bond issuances in the future, and wishing.
For AAA, okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So, and that's actually, I do think it's helpful to have the 3 distinct categories of things that we talk about,
Right.
the general stabilization and then the special purpose.
yeah,
Ones, the discussion around, do you have to have one for every project? I
well,
don't know if.
I don't know.
I'd like to think not, but you have to sell it to town meeting.
yeah,
It's, you're gonna put funds in here because,
yeah,
we didn't get fund, police and fire.
I think
So
we have, I think we have,
historically, we've done it, but.
I think we, as I read the materials on DLS, but I haven't spent a lot of time in the statutes. I think we have a certain amount of flexibility in how we define what the purpose is.
So, yeah,
So you can define the purpose generally as, to choose an example, to stabilize debt incurred as a result of the acquisition of property and building of buildings on that property for purposes of public services. Or public safety generally, so you could pick up the police and the fire in one stabilization fund. I think we could tailor the definitions.
Yeah.
So that there's a certain amount of flexibility, which is, could be important because. We should start, if we're gonna do this, you wanna start funding it sooner rather than later, and you won't necessarily go into it knowing. The order in which you're gonna do something, and you don't wanna have tied up funds. For building the fire station, it was determined that we have an opportunity to do something for the police.
Mhm.
And we can, do it more quickly.
especially when you wanna start sooner than later, like we don't have the defined design or location.
Exactly.
You know, but we know it's coming. It's
Yeah, we know it's,
Flexibility is better.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
just tracking it.
and I guess, and one other point I wanted to make that relates to all of these, but this as well, is that. My impression. As I, over the last 5 years, have started to understand this more and more, is that Concord borrows a lot of money.
mhm.
And maybe my sense from looking at some of the data last time is that we borrow money to pay for things that other towns don't necessarily borrow to pay for, and we do it both
Yes.
within the levy limit.
Yeah.
And I think our borrowing outside the levy limit is a little, it's a lot. But it's kind of transparent in the sense that it's gotta be approved to town meeting, and it's gotta be approved to the ballot box, it's gotta be explained. But I think there's a lot of other borrowing we do for certain purposes that other towns don't.
Mhm.
And that may be partly because they have reserves or
Mhm.
for any number of other reasons, but we end up spending a lot on debt service.
Yeah, and that gets into your 2-1, too.
Yes.
Yeah,
right, which
exactly,
it
probably
does.
has been changing,
We,
right?
we act like it's a surprise that fire trucks need to be replaced, other communities plan ahead for them, but the money is not even.
We're planning, right, we know they're coming, but it's sort of just this practice that we've always had, every year we're gonna have so much
Yeah.
debt, and
Yeah.
we set our capital budget in part by how much debt is retiring.
Yeah,
So.
So I'd like to, that's not gonna drive this inquiry, but I'd like
Right.
to not lose sight of it. Because I
Separate thought,
think
but-
that's potentially an issue for us going forward in terms of. The burden on taxpayers and in terms of our, potentially in terms of our bond ratings, and that was a really useful presentation at the finance committee.
I did, and I actually do really want to follow up on some of that, and it does come into some of our policy stuff.
Yeah, and so I just wanna, our discussion's being formed by that.
You know, so one of them that's actually very relevant, I talked about all stabilization funds, so one of the ones that's in the Moody's is this percentage of, they want more than 35% of funds in stabilization funds, or actually what they really want is off your audited financials, unrestricted funds. And I
Right.
actually think that should be one of our policies.
Uh-huh.
I really do, when we
Mhm.
talk in
Totally agree.
totality. The trick is, those are annual audited financial calculations. Which when we get on track, it'll be fine, but it is a different way to look at dollars, but
different
I think
base.
it's important.
Would you read the Moody's policy
The
says?
Moody's policy to maintain a AAA rating
Yeah.
is you have to be greater than 35%
Of,
of the general fund.
Which
Yeah.
then-
But that means that's your accumulated unrestricted funds, which is free cash.
yeah,
All your unrestricted fund balance.
And it includes the
Yeah.
enterprise funds.
No, well,
I thought.
so it's sort of interesting when Moody's is talking about it, because they sort of say
yeah,
they treat them differently
Yeah.
because they're self-supported through fees.
Well,
So
Moody's
yes,
does.
it's debt, but when they started to looking at Concord's, because they didn't use them,
well,
they used just the general fund unrestricted.
right, and having looked at this as much as I have. It actually is what I learned in that meeting, puts us in a little less worse shape than I thought we were. Because I thought we had enterprise fund revenues coming in, the transfers from the enterprise funds. which is our fastest growing source of revenue, by the way.
Okay,
That's the way the
Yeah, I
town
thought-
accounts for the services.
so, no, and they should be in there, because that is part of our revenue. That should be part
No,
of,
yeah, that's,
It is.
it is.
okay,
But I thought that that was to cover the debt service on the enterprise fund bonds. It's not.
oh, no,
No.
that's just admin, that's overhead for finance,
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
Brian, you know, so like
Yeah.
everybody, yeah,
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
means that the full 11.7% of our budget that's going to interest and debt service is only on the town's portion,
Yeah.
not counting the enterprise funds
Yeah.
portion, and I'd love to do that calculation in
Yeah.
total. I think, to your first comment, Congress very heavily leveraged.
It is, I mean, it's hard when you have, in the water department, $50 million and another 10 million in CMLP. And then we just did the roads program, the roads program is town,
Yeah,
I mean, it's sort of our general.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's,
That's
the
just
reason-
like,
that's the reason we're very clear
Hmm.
with Hilltop through Ryan, and they
Yeah.
were very responsive, that
Yeah.
we didn't just wanna see issued debt.
Yeah.
We want to see authorized, but
Yeah,
not
yeah,
yet issued
yeah,
debt,
yeah.
and that's what they showed us.
which was, it's sort of, their response was interesting too, right? Because when they look at the debt, when you look at their Moody's calculation, it's
Yeah.
sort of issued debt, right? It's not,
right.
but they're mindful of it. I mean, I'm like, I don't know what to say about it.
We have to be
There's a
able
lot.
to look ahead, right?
Yeah,
And work.
And they do, they have that list.
Yeah,
right?
Hilltop has it.
But I mean, as a part of the decision of when to issue debt.
Yeah.
One of the variables.
Every time you issue, you're gonna go to the market, Moody's is gonna want to
Yeah.
assess your.
Right. That's why I asked that question, what would happen if we came to, brought all of that to market this year?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, so that
I
needs
will
to be a
say-
variable in our
Yeah.
calculation of when to come to market with the
Yeah.
debt.
Yeah.
We need to be,
And that's usually,
yeah, okay.
so yeah, the Moody's had that calculation, just going back to that 35%.
I do wanna make one more point on,
Yeah.
on stabilization, special purpose stabilization funds. And that is, while they have a named function, it only requires the same vote at town meeting to change that. You can transfer from one to another. So if you say, you know, we did it this way, we have this great opportunity, now we wanna dip into the roads stabilization
Yeah.
fund to pay for the fire department,
Mhm.
you can do that at town meeting as well.
Right.
You
Just
And-
have to do with town meeting.
That
Yeah.
specified need had been met
Mhm.
or had been overly anticipated and wasn't as great as you thought, and
Right,
it's safe to move the funds over for this other worthy purpose.
and one reason I really like that is it would prompt a discussion of, but don't we still have that need? It would get that front and center, because today it's simply, let's borrow $50 million, as if there is no other need. And if we have them all the major buckets of a capital plan, front and center, and we talk about transferring from one to another, that would prompt the question, are we gonna do that other one?
Yeah.
Everything sounds really good on its own. If you only look at one thing, everything is worthy.
Yeah,
But when you have to make value judgments and decide among how we're going to spend our money, then you make different decisions.
well, but you know, nothing will stop a citizen petition from coming to town meeting, right? So
Well,
we're
that's
still gonna have that,
that, yeah,
But-
that's fine.
right? But
But
you know,
today, it's not a part of the conversation of whether we're doing this or we're doing that. That's never considered.
so you're saying in the capital planning process.
Yes,
Which also means every capital project has to have some inherent understanding of the cost and how you're
Yes.
gonna finance it, right?
right.
Right, exactly.
It should.
I don't think we
And
always
what
do
the
that.
implications
Right.
of financing that particular project are for the town's overall financing.
Yeah.
Financial position, which
Yeah.
I think has been the piece that's been missing.
If we don't do that, it's just a list. It's not a capital plan, it's just a list.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so like the slides that we had the other night, with
Yeah.
all the debt that's there, that's all, you know, you can see old debt rolling off, but we're gonna have new that's rolling in. So when we start talking
More
about.
debt, then it's rolling off. So,
Yeah, but yet you got CMS pretty flat because of the funding
Right,
mechanism
right.
there, right? But all these other ones have been rolling off, and that's your last 10 years of capital projects.
Wendy, one of the things I did in my
Yeah.
corporate world was manage a capital plan
Mhm.
for S&P 500
Yeah.
Corporation. You can have a list of projects, but that's not a capital plan.
No, it has the full debt schedule and all of them, that's what we.
That's right,
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 I
right.
mean,
So we,
traditionally, we've had it, it's not always been discussed.
No, I've never, I
Shared.
haven't seen it yet, but okay.
I'm also very,
I would love to share it with the town meeting, so people are aware of what is
Mhm.
coming and what,
Yeah.
you know, what their
well,
priorities
it's like the graphic, it is the graphic without the detail. You can see it visually, it's actually impressive, but
The graphic without.
the graphic that had all the debt, right, so your hill that was coming down, that debt was
That's,
going
I'm
up.
talking about a capital plan for forward.
Yeah, but so that's that graphic is your existing capital, but you're saying pile on every future project and the financing for each one.
No,
No.
that graphic is dead. I'm talking about capital plan.
No,
which
but
is-
that graphic is your current capital funding, right? It's all your debt and your bonds that are rolling off, that is your previously decided capital.
But Don's talking about.
I know, now he's saying, take your future capital and do sort of the same thing.
It has nothing to do with debt. It has nothing to do with debt. It has to do with the needs and our prioritization and the amount of impact of each of those projects.
And then.
Right.
And
And then-
once you
And then you
define
figure out how to
that,
fund it.
then you talk about how to finance it, but
Right,
that's what we've never qualitatively done. We've always been sort of reactive in a good project that crossed our desk. And,
Yeah.
and now we're at a point as a town
Mhm.
where we really have to start making some prioritization there, because we're getting a little too close to the Prop 2.5 cutoff. We are entering into a period of economic uncertainty.
Mhm.
That was the rest of the discussion of the finance committee after the Hilltop.
Mhm.
Which we boldly stayed for, Spencer's discussion, where we talked about trying to look forward just a year to think about what we should be
So-
providing as guidance to the budgeting entities. And there are these huge question marks about, are the tariffs going to create inflation? If so, how extreme is it going to be? And when is it going to hit?
Mhm.
And, you know, there's all these imponderables that we just.
So we
don't
have
have, so we're entering that kind of a period of time. We
Right.
need, Concord just needs to be more thoughtful about
so just, so
how
help
it's
me out, so
allocating its resources and not assume the resources are unlimited.
Right, so just tell me out what this means, that you got a
Yeah.
10-year plan, which is everyone's wish list of capital they think they need, and they feel like trust in that area, buying it up, sort of make sure that you put it in the right place, and because, you know, your capital replacement needs are there, but then you have a plan, these are large capital, but you're not paying for all of that in 1 year, because
No.
it is debt, so you still need to anticipate,
Yeah.
so this is capital, but you're gonna have a debt schedule.
But I think the wish list is an early part of that process. The capital plan starts with a wish list.
Right, so my ask
But
is,
then
what do you
it's
do
not
as a next
with
step
decision
beyond?
made.
We have the 10-year plan, these are, every department's gone through and said, this is what I think I need, here's my fire truck replacement, here's my building, roof replacement, all that stuff is there.
Yeah.
So then, what do you do to sort of further project out that debt? So
See-
each one has that. I mean, you're not gonna buy all of it in 1 year, right?
right,
So-
no, so that you take that wish list, right,
Yeah.
and then you look at cost avoidance, say, well, just as we did with the roads. By doing the roads bill, bond issuance, we are avoiding future costs. We
Yeah.
do that as well within the capital plan, we find that
Right.
some things. There really isn't any cost avoidance, and others are gonna pay for themselves if we prioritize them. Secondly, you do,
Yeah.
well, through.
I don't know how something pays.
Cost
The
avoidance.
roads are the poster child.
Right, but even that program, right? It has a funding side on it, right?
Yes.
So you
Right.
still need to do
You
that.
have to have a funding cycle, no
Yeah,
question
every
about
one of them's I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. You're justifying every single one, right? Now is the time when you
Yeah.
need that,
And-
is what you're saying.
and
And I
you're-
thought we did that.
You're sort of figuring out the net present value of each of those projects rather than.
Yeah,
its-
yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Well, some of them aren't gonna. I mean,
I know,
you gotta buy a fire truck when you have to buy. it.
And can I just interject,
Yeah.
we're getting close to an hour.
Yeah.
We have only an hour, so like, and this is all very informative,
Yeah.
it's like, it's kind of where it's.
We're not.
Let's see what.
it's okay,
Okay, public comments at 1:55.
Oh, you know, I put it to two, but you know what, we did book the room for 1-3, but.
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
these are all like,
Yeah,
good
well,
we
it's
bring it
time
back
is-
in as though
yeah,
we're
yeah, yeah,
actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, good, but I was thinking we had mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to just offer that on, that in the ideal world, we wouldn't be, in my view, we'd be creating capital stabilization funds for things we need 10 years from now. We'd be
Yeah.
putting aside a little bit so that it is a done deal by the time that the bill.
so not the excluded debt, then you're saying, from a maintenance
So it
perspective.
wouldn't be, we
It's
would
your
need
tier
to
one
take
and
on
two.
excluded.
Right.
Yes.
Tier 1 and
Tier 1 and 2, and
Right.
the roads would never be a tier 3 because we would have funded them this one.
Yeah, hopefully.
Secondly, capital stabilization to me makes a lot more sense than debt stabilization makes no sense. You should be putting that entire amount to reducing the debt right from day one.
Yeah, well,
And then third,
I can't say correctly, I don't know if it makes no sense, because there are some times when you can use the debt stabilization and find a way that, to bring the, if you're trying to get a project through.
Yeah.
For example, that has merit, but costs may be such that people may shy away from it, you may want to have something in reserve that then offsets it, so it can serve a purpose, it's, so.
it serves a purpose, and in the world of level principle, it serves a very good purpose. Again, I was referring more to the choice, if you have like our middle school where it's level payments all the way
Mhm.
through, why do we have a debt stabilization that helps for a couple of years? It doesn't, why don't we just
That's it.
apply it all to reduce the principal today? And then it brings it down the costs for all
Right.
years.
Right, and what I'm referring to.
Yeah,
Yeah, all right. And last point I wanted to make before turning it over is the annual reserve fund. Some towns have a larger annual reserve fund, which would get to your question earlier last week about, well, if you have to go to town meeting anyway, why not just use free cash? And why have a stabilization fund, the general stabilization fund? And well, some towns put a lot of money into the annual reserve fund and then roll it every year.
so what?
It's appropriated.
The
as part of
finance
the budget.
reserve fund, I'm calling it the finance
And then
reserve
you
fund.
don't use the.
Is that what you need to?
Yeah.
Just need to go to the finance.
Then it's already appropriated by town, you don't even need a town meeting. It's dangerous though, because,
I was gonna say, it's,
yeah,
right.
but
Yeah.
It can become kind of a slushman. And your own
Well, you
control
want-
on it is,
Right.
is a finance
Yep.
committee vote.
right,
And at the point at which somebody's going to finance committee and asking for money, it's a situation that's become a real problem, like the legal fees for rest for goods.
right.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, you want both.
so that's it.
that in. Okay, so, you're right, the agenda is set. and-
I'm just saying, just kind of just keep it.
I'm sorry,
I had to be the role of Umar here, but.
No,
Thank you.
I actually think it's a good topic. Let me just go back to this, well, we've been all over the place on reserve policy issues, I think just as we're still walking through this. We've been covering both of those items that we talked about, discussing. We've had a lot of discussion on these stabilization funds, and we acknowledge that there were other town policies that we thought were interesting that we had looked at, but we didn't necessarily bring them forth. Do we want to do some homework and look at some of those and bring those other ideas back at a follow-up meeting? Would that be?
It would seem as if from like, so we're done, you're looking at the existing town policies.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Which actually, which actually aren't bad, but there may
Yeah.
be some refinements that can be made from that.
Yeah.
Such that maybe, we could think about coming back at a future meeting with, all right, these are the existing policies and how do we want, how would it be appropriate to amend them?
Yeah.
If at all.
Yeah.
But, I think we've seen some of the other policies too, Don, and you've got your whole list.
Yeah.
What are the things that maybe make more, make more sense to make those refinements? Basically either augment or alter, what we already have to some extent.
Right, so I think this is more a question of style over substance. I do think it'd be nice if we change the style, over time, of our policies. That said, the substance is really where we need to be focused
Right,
first.
right.
Right.
So, I mean, that doesn't mean we can't do both.
Yeah.
Because there's really a couple core facts that we're really honing in on, and, you know, if you wanna document them in a standalone policy, which might actually help getting the approval process through, and then you have the ideas of the best practice of when was it written, when was it reviewed, and that
Right.
type of thing,
Right.
which is not a bad thing. So how do we format it? We can hold them.
Well, if we stick to this substance for a moment, given what's in that memo, were there any? Is any reaction from
See, but I think when we talk to, and I've already said it, but I think. A lot of towns say free cash, general stabilization, and then special
yeah,
stabilization funds. I like that,
Yeah.
those three categorizations.
yeah,
And of course, I wanna talk further about the percentages.
I don't have any issue with that. I'm happy
Yeah,
with breaking out general from special, yeah.
Yeah,
And then one model for that, one of the policies that you called out as being particularly model was Belmont.
Yes,
And Belmont does that, it's
and
graphically, it's instructively different, but they talk about each kind of reserve fund. And they suggest specific percentage targets for the various types of
Right.
reserve funds.
and I think they also have an aggregate one too. I
Well,
could be
it's,
wrong.
you can have both an aggregate.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and allocate it, and then you can revisit it.
Yeah.
it's
It
good.
changes.
Yeah.
It is good model, very good model.
Ryan, is there anyone online who with the hand raised? Since we did call for the agenda.
Does not appear to be so.
Is Linda still
Trying to
here?
craft for the financial
Oh.
policy meeting, I'm heartbroken.
Mm.
Well,
So,
we want to,
so any
Yeah.
other substantive
Okay.
questions on, I think, or comments, I agree, Wendy, yeah, I see no reason not to. Give special purpose its own section.
Yeah. Yes, I know. So, can do that, so at the next meeting. Revisit what we have in our town meeting, in our own policies today. Just make sure that we haven't missed anything there, and then maybe other town, we can each sort of look at
Yeah.
other towns and bring those ideas.
and I think what, and Don, what you presented today was the existing policies.
Correct.
So then it would be, then maybe, you know, Don, if you're up for it, maybe coming in and asking, or just making some recommendations.
Yeah.
Regarding what, you know, how that might be refined, if we read those three categories, makes sense.
Yeah.
So maybe, you know, what other refinements based on what you've seen in Belmont, or other suggestions as to what maybe. What those policies could be refined for to better meet our needs.
Right,
And I'd also
the
like
other-
to get to that point about the Moody's.
yes,
And the
yes, that's a good one,
amount of
that's a good one.
That's a
Yes.
good one.
Yeah.
And the idea, the definition of what we're applying that percentage against.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what
that's-
defines
that's-
yeah, that's it, and it's a big difference, because if you're talking about including a regional in the budget or not, that.
And that ripples through, and the result of that calculation comes up with a much bigger number.
That's right.
So, and also the money's gonna have to come out of town's free cash. If you're including regional, they have their own reserves.
Yeah,
And you're not gonna be able to stick your hand into
No.
their reserves to supplement, to hit those numbers, so it really may put a lot of pressure on other uses and other. It just changes the calculus a lot. So.
It does.
Yeah. You know, the other thing
And
is,
do we understand the treatment of reserve funds within enterprise funds? Because another thing I've been seeing a lot of these policies is, maybe it was on the DLS site, about best practices,
Mhm.
about
yeah, right.
enterprise funds maintaining 3 to 6 months of operating capital in a reserve. I don't know if that is the status of our enterprise fund reserves, whether we have a lot of money in excess of that and how.
Yeah, I don't have an update on that, but.
Yeah.
CMLP, I will tell you that CMLP has like a 5-page document, they have more than one reserve, they've got multiple restricted funds, and it was always maintaining 3 months of operating
Mhm.
reserves, and I think they have more, but then I think you said they were like 15 million or something.
Yeah.
And it was sort of, again, it's the unrestricted balance funds.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a big number, BD doesn't have that
I think
larger
so,
reserve.
that's
than-
whole different policy though, it's not,
Is it?
yeah, because that you're
It
talking
is,
enterprise by
it
retained
is.
earnings.
But
Which isn't part of it.
But Lois is right, though, I mean, I think that in the sense that it may be good to be thinking about these things too, because not all, you know, what we're talking about maybe in the light plant versus
Yeah.
we have a BD. Could be
Yeah, they're
very different
different.
things,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yep.
the needs, while different, they're still needs.
Right.
On both sides of it.
Right.
But they also fully fund depreciation, right? So if you look at their income statements, you're gonna see a big depreciation line.
Yeah.
So like any business, that's how they're funding their capital. And in town, we're using stabilization funds, right? So it's
Yeah.
different. That's the
Well,
parallel.
and it also may affect how much money, how we set these percentages.
Mhm.
Because if we're looking at the enterprise funds and realizing that they've entirely protected themselves,
Mhm.
then that may affect how much we need to set aside.
Well, and I think that's what Moody kind of implied when it
Yeah,
came to the
that's right.
stabilization funds. It would be good to know
But-
explicitly how Moody's made that calculation, how they got the 30%, because
Yeah.
I looked at the 23 financials and our unrestricted is negative.
Right.
But then you also have to add in your current assets, so I don't know if
Right.
that's exactly what it is, but it
Yeah,
might need to do a little digging on that.
good question, that's a great
And
question.
just one last point with the enterprise funds too, part of that is also might change their perspective on what's, you know, their fee structure, their revenue structure, which
Yeah.
is. Whether it be water, sewer, or BD center, you know, that if there's a goal to establish, to establish a 36-month window of operations, then maybe that needs to also be incorporated into whatever rate structure they're looking at, to bring in that kind of money to sustain that over the long term.
I don't see how any of that has anything to do with this policy.
No, I understand, but it's, I just something
It's an
we
important financial.
don't necessarily wanna lose
So-
the complete side of it, because that would be a
Yeah,
nice
I
thing
will,
to.
I will tell you, it is the audited financials for the light plant that got the light plant to document the policies. And it was because we had too much cash.
Right,
That sort of just begged the question of what are our policies, and they documented all of that.
well, a consultant, looking at the light plant books and reported to the committee that they're hitting the maximum allowable law.
Well, the DOR has it, well, no, they have a different regulation. They have it like an 8% capital fund, so the audit financials track two things. There's they have is it return on capital? CMLP has a specific, their return as a percentage of capital assets can't exceed 8%. That's the thing that they look for.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so
Because it's regulated.
it's an annual,
It's a
profit
regulatory
margin as
requirement.
opposed to.
Oh,
Yeah,
uh,
it's not your profit, it's not your typical profit, it's return on capital.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's the one that they use, so.
So I guess the next thing we need to do is pick a date for the next meeting.
Yes, next meeting.
And, we'll, depending on when we are, I may have to start going remote occasionally, so
Yeah.
we're back
We're fine.
in the
we're
land of
fine.
technology.
Yeah.
Easy to do.
Do we want to meet in a week, 2 weeks?
I can't meet next week, I'm
Okay,
away next week.
and then I think I actually can't meet the following week. Let
Oh.
me just see. Oh, no, I can. It's the week of the 23rd. That's the week of the 22nd. I can't. Do we want to try the 16th
That's
at 1
fine,
o'clock?
fine with me.
16.
I think I can make that work.
Okay,
It would be remote, but I can be there.
okay. As long as you're okay with that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No,
Ryan, how's your schedule?
Let's see. Oh, I can't, yeah, actually, that I cannot do, so.
Can you do
I gotta-
earlier or later that day?
We could do that, let's see. I do have a 1 o'clock, we do a townwide payroll meeting, so,
So maybe not. before
yeah,
then.
that's, but, I think. Anytime between 10 and 1, I could probably do,
I can do that.
I
on
can
the
Do that.
16th.
Oh.
Wanna do 10?
Sure.
so 10 AM.
10 a.m.
Okay, and then, yeah, let's do 10 to 11:30, this way, whatever, that's good.
Let's recap action items.
Okay, yes, thank you. So we're gonna, for our next meeting, we're gonna recap sort of just re-review our current policy, which we already did, but I think it's worth looking at how it's written. We were gonna look at other town policies, and each of us will bring sort of ideas from those, and if we do have them, let's, maybe we'll be prepared to bring them up online. I don't know if there are any of the links that I provided, but there's others.
Can we say that we would each pick our favorite of them?
Oh, okay.
Something of that sort, and then, because there are, I think we have about 8 models right now, out there.
Sure.
Eight different
Well,
types.
so we each bring one, okay, that
Or
works.
we can by email, just circulate, let each of us let the other know which ones we're taking responsibility for.
We can exchange, yeah, well, then
No,
let's give
I
up,
mean, wouldn't it be nice if we all had the same favorite? It would just
Right.
eliminate a bunch of.
Yeah, I know.
So we'll just
Yeah.
leave it and look at other town policies.
And, yeah,
Yeah.
pick what you prefer of them.
Yeah.
And another action, I think, is Ryan's well, I'm happy to do it if it's what you're.
Yeah, no, I'll get the percentages, I think it is, yeah, I'll get back to you, but.
The percentage of the votes.
On the votes,
Yeah.
or to reserve funds, yeah.
I know there was a recent change, so.
So trying to budget these funds and also to look at.
Define.
What comprises the general fund against
Yeah.
which the percentages would be applied.
Ryan, I will send you something I sent, that I sent on it, cause it has the general fund in it, and I think it came out of the munis finances.
Mhm.
It was something I had sent to Anthony, and it was asking for verification of of the policies and how the calculation was made, so maybe it's my interpretation, but they might not us.
What else do we have as a need action items?
I think that's it for me.
That's it.
Sure.
Good. Great,
Make a motion to adjourn?
so moved.